Page 21, we'll start there. I don't know where we're going to end. Now we're getting into the staff of musical notation. Now if you already play an instrument other than percussion, I assume you can already read either treble or bass. Depending on the instrument, you might even read both, I don't know. With piano, you have to read both. So let's just review briefly. I'm sure you already know what this is, but it helps to make my video a little longer and more boring, so let's go through this. A staff is those groups of 5 lines. Okay, end of story. You have 5 lines or 4 spaces. The spaces are in between the lines? Okay. Now we have clef signs, because the 5 lines by themselves is nice, but when you put notes in those lines, you need to know what the note is. It could be anything. Any note can be, an A can be anywhere on the staff, for instance. The clef sign tells us where what is. Treble clef or G clef. They show in the middle of the page on page 21. And it is called a G clef because it points out where the note G is on the staff. And that is the next to the bottom line is a G, and this is the G right above middle C. Well, that's nice. So what's middle C? Well, hopefully you know what middle C is, but on a piano, middle C is basically the C that's in front of you, more or less, when you're sitting in the middle of the keyboard. So it's just pick a C that's in front of you, not to the edge, and that's it. Usually there's a name of a key or the piano there somewhere, and it's near that. It's not middle C because it's in the middle of the piano, because it's not in the middle of the piano. It's called middle C because it's in the middle of a grand staff. We'll get to that a little later. But the G we're talking about is the G above middle C. This is middle C, go up to the G, and that's that G. So when you see a note on the next to the bottom line in treble clef, you play this note on the piano. That's as complicated as it gets. So that takes care of the treble clef, which will cover most of the higher notes here. Then at the bottom of page 21, they talk about the bass clef or the F clef. F clef because it points out where F is, and that is the next to the top line, and it's the line in between the dots here. I didn't mention it, but the G line and treble clef, that's where it's in the middle of that bottom curl. That's it. But bass clef, it's easier to see because it's in between the dots, and it's the F below middle C here. Now we use bass clef basically for the lower notes down here. Okay. You gotta learn to read both clefs. All right, it comes. So just relax. We'll get there. On page 22, they introduce you to the grand staff. All right, let's talk grand staff. Basically, it's 2 stabs, could be 3. Generally, it's 2 stabs. And the thing that identifies it as a grand staff is the curly brace in front of it. That little curly thingy. Grand staff has that. Any instrument that needs a lot of notes will use a grand staff. Pianos, harps, organs, whatever. If you have a lot of notes, you can use a grand staff. And they show you the notes in the music in relation to the notes on the piano. Well, if that doesn't scare you, you're a lot braver than I am. I look at something like that and I say, forget you. I'm going to take up knitting or something, because this is ugh. However, I suggest we take this just a few notes at a time, and gradually over time we can figure it out. Of course, if you know where G and F is and that in the staff, you can figure out the other notes by going up or down the alphabet. However, we don't have time to going up or down the alphabet. We need to just know instantly the names of these notes. And if you know at least one of the clefs already, you're halfway home. You only have to learn the other. If you're a percussion player and you haven't learned either clefs, you could have a problem. But I'm guessing even a percussion player, you probably read both clefs by now, because you have the bells on one side and you have the timpani on the other, and they're using the clef signs already. Now in the example they're showing on page 22, they're showing treble and bass clef signs. Keep in mind that's not absolute. The clef signs could be both treble or both bass, or treble and bass. I've never seen a bass on top and treble on the bottom. In my mind, that's totally backwards, because in piano, and again, you're going to learn that in music if you haven't learned already, there's a lot of things about music and notation and theory that people don't agree. But in piano, generally speaking, the right hand will play the stuff in the upper staff and the left hand will play the stuff in the lower staff, but there's no rule that says it must be that way. It's done out of convenience. So because the right hand is closer to the higher notes, and those are in the upper staff, the right hand does it, and same with the lower staff and the left hand. Okay, it's just convenient. Just keep in mind that those clef signs can change. Always check the clef signs. At the bottom of page 22, they talk time signatures. I trust you understand time signatures because you got to have time signatures pretty much no matter what instrument you play. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on time signatures. Page 23, they give you naming notes and melodic patterns. Playing melodic patterns, because we don't name melodic patterns. There are very few melodic patterns that have names, but we name the notes. So I trust you do that. You name the notes. Just know what these notes are: the C and the G and the C and C, whatever, you know. And then you can play the melodic patterns, and they're giving you the starting finger number, or because it could be any finger, whatever. The one thing I want to point out that I forgot to, shame on me, but I'm old, I forget things. There are some notes in reading music that you can kind of use as milestones. And some approaches to learning to read music use milestones big time. I don't use them big time, but I do use them occasionally. About the only milestone I use, well, for the clef signs is the G and the F. For that. But the other milestone I use are the C's, because the C's are symmetrical in the grand staff. Middle C's in the middle of it. It's in a line in the middle of the grand staff. If they would put this on page 22, they'd put those staffs closer together. That middle C could be right in the middle of it. Okay, because it's on a ledger line. A ledger line's those little lines above or below staff. Okay, it's on a ledger line below treble clef, but it's also on a ledger line above bass clef. It's the same note. So it's in the middle of a grand staff. Well, then you'll notice the C's here going up and down. They're in the upper space or lower space of the staffs. They're symmetrical. And the other C's, these, they're two ledger lines. So this C is two ledger lines above treble. This C is two ledger lines below bass. They're symmetrical. So sometimes I will use the C's to help me figure out notes if I need to. Talk about that more in the future too. On page 24, they talk about tempo marks. Okay. Tempo in music for us, it simply means speed. What's the tempo? How fast does it go? There's a lot more tempo marks than this. And a lot of times in piano music, where they're supposed to tell you the tempo, which is above the top staff at the beginning. Instead of the tempo, instead of the speed, they tell you the mood of the piece. They might say pleasantly. Well, that's not a speed. But the idea is, if you know the mood, you'll get the speed from the mood. We'll talk about that quite a bit, because it gets into a nasty word we call interpretation. Articulation in the middle of the page is sort of how you express the notes, how you articulate the notes. All kinds of different ways of that, and there's various marks for it. They show you the big slur line, means legato, or you connect it. Some people will say, play it smoothly. Well, I can't do smooth on a piano. You can do smooth on a violin or a clarinet or some instrument where you can connect the notes without, one note just leads into another note. They go together very nicely. Piano's percussive. We have to play the note, so each one starts with a hit. The hammer hits the string, and then it dies away. Then you hit it, and then it dies away. You hit it. We can play it connected so there's no emptiness or no silence between them, but we can't play it what I call smooth. We can just, I can connect them, okay? Or I can disconnect them. That's pretty much it. You can connect it or disconnect it, take your pick. Now, if you disconnect it, there's various degrees of that. Real short, or a longer one. They're still disconnected, there's just different lengths of the note. Remember, music is sound and silence. So sometimes you have silence here between the notes. There's sound and silence going on here. Someone asked once in a music teacher's thing that I monitor is student asked, well, if I have a quarter note staccato, those dots they show are staccatos, that means play them disconnected. If I have an eighth note staccato and I have a quarter note staccato, does the quarter note last longer than the eighth note? Do I hold it down longer before I lift up on the eighth note? And the answer is no. It's the same length of sound. The difference is the length of silence is longer. Remember, music is sound and silence. So if I have eighth note quarter notes, 1 and 2 and, or quarter note staccatos, 1 and 2 and, it's the silence that lasts longer, not the note, or not the sound. That's the difference. Now, I mention a phrase here. A phrase is like a sentence or musical thought. And a lot of times in music, you can tell where the musical thoughts are. Those are the phrases. The problem is that big curved line is used to indicate both, sometimes. Welcome to music. For instance, let's look on page 25. The first one, here, there's no articulation or anything shown. It's just notes. If I connect them here, that would be like a big slur over the whole thing. I connected it all. If I put in the phrases, I'm guessing every 2 measures seems to be a phrase. To me, that's a musical thought. This, that's a musical thought. And then it's another musical thought. Here, it's like a statement reply feel. Statement reply. Well, if I'm going to put in the phrasing, I'm going to connect the phrase, but I'm going to lift up between the phrases, like taking a breath. So the half note on the second measure would be a little short, so I can lift up. There, that's the phrasing. Okay, well, the curved line could be indicating either one or neither one. In this one, there's no curved line or anything. It's up to you to figure it out. But the difference between the slur and the phrase, as I understand it, is a slur. When it's given a slur, you have to connect the notes within the slur. You may or may not connect the notes before or after the slur. Depends on the music. In a phrase, you may or may not connect the notes within a phrase, because I can have staccatos in a phrase. But you disconnect the notes between phrases in most cases. Although you can have phrases that are connected together, called elided phrases. In that case, you play it all like one long sentence. Yes, that's the difference. So, in this first example on page 25, since there's no articulation given, it's entirely up to you how you want to play it. I could play them disconnected if I wanted to. Yeah. Because the music doesn't say anything. It's up to me. Generally, in today's environment, when the music doesn't say anything, the default is connect the notes. Didn't used to be that way. Hundreds of years ago, it was the other way. You would disconnect the notes slightly, back in the 1700s and before, and then it kind of evolved as music has evolved, and now we connect the notes. If they were to put the slur there, you don't get a choice anymore. You do it as you want. I'm talking about interpretation. I try and teach some interpretation in my videos. Most teachers don't teach any interpretation at all. Just do what the music tells you to do and leave me alone. I'm guessing because they were never taught, or they don't understand it, or they don't see the point. But to me, interpretation is where it's at. That's what it's all about. All this note stuff and music, yuck, that's all mechanical. Give it to a computer if you do it. But when you start feeling the music, you start getting into it, you're turning it into emotion with sound. That's interpreting the music. The tempo, articulation, dynamics, all that stuff, they're telling you a little bit of how to interpret it. They're giving you some general guides of how to interpret it. You can do more than what they're giving you. You can always do more. So we kind of talked about that. You got to get through the mechanical, you learn the notes and the rhythms, and get that all out of the way. And then you get into the music, you start feeling the music. You're not thinking about notes and rhythms. It's happening pretty much automatic, and you start feeling the phrases and these things. We'll get into it. Anyway, on page 25, you can read those melodies, I hope. Make sure you do know the names of all those notes. Now, they give you a couple of different counting styles. I don't like the 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I would prefer you do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, whatever, and get in that habit if you can. The idea with the 1, 1, 1, 1 is that's how long each note lasts. So you're just counting as long as a note lasts. You don't worry about which beat of the measure you're on. That can be dangerous. You need to know which beat of the measure you're on, believe me.